Video lecture 2, Primitivism. I'm getting this done on that snow day we had in January. I'm going to get it done no matter what. Primitivism breaks the boundaries. One way we observe style trends, things, musical style characteristics, artistic characteristics, trends in those things, is to see what a new movement seems to push back against, what it swings away from in the past. One such turnaround is this topic of primitivism. French painters turned to something wilder than the sweet, pretty visions of Impressionism, all those pastel-colored, non-emotional, non-narrative paintings that just said, here's some light reflecting on an object using tones of nature and things like that. They rebelled against that and turned to a movement called Fauvism. Fauve comes from the word wild, as in wild beast. These paintings were more emotional, they thought, intended to be more emotional, more wild, more primal. The paintings had in them simplified shapes and violent primary colors, not colors next to each other on the color wheel like pink and less pink and slightly orangey pink, but instead red versus blue, blue versus yellow, colors opposite on the color wheel. The emotionless non-narrative of Impressionism was exchanged for another non-narrative view. There's not a hero quest going on, but the view, the painting, is full of energy and emotion. It's like a capsule of oomph. So by the time the musicians are ready to handle this sort of thing, they've got another painting movement to use as a sort of a template. And that's where primitivism begins, with music. We had hints of noise in Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Remember the cry of despair in the fourth movement? And we had hints of noise, actually quite a bit of noise, in the battle sounds in Heldenleben. But now, in primitivism, 20th century, early 20th century, noise does not resolve into tranquility. The resolution is not what we're about here, because we're not on a journey of hero quest, battle, victory, retire. Now we're just in the middle of battle for the sake of its own self. This idea of noise, or dissonance, discord, energy for its own sake, attacks everything musical that came before it. Brute force and emotion, not rational thought, will take over. This emotion is meant to shove us away from all of the associations and expectations of past tonal music. So take everything from 1600 on and say, we turn away from it. Tonality, as my old professor would say, is under attack by exotic, primitive scales and recognized folk music gestures. Exotic, primitive scales that don't have 7 different pitches in them with a leading tone and things like that. And recognized folk music gestures. We had folk music before. We've used it before as exoticism in the 19th century. Let me give you a flavor of something Hungarian. Let me give you a flavor of something from Bali in Impressionism. But now the folk music gestures are meant to take us to a land before time. The folk music gestures are supposed to make us think we are in prehistoric human existence. And instead of taking these folk gestures and harmonizing them with regular tonal progressions, like you learned to do in Theory 2, whatever, now We harmonized those things with big static blocks of sound, cubes and chunks of sound, if you will, like big blobs of primary colored paint. You remember the static chords from Coronation Scene in Boris Godunov? If you take those two major chords that are a tritone apart, I think it was D major and A flat, and we just opposed them back and forth, there was no sense of progression. Neither of those chords won. It didn't resolve to any of those things. That kind of static opposition of unresolving chords is what we're talking about harmonically. So, we're about to start with a landmark work by Igor Stravinsky. Stravinsky had been writing music in Paris at this time from the beginning of the early 20th century. He was successful writing for the Ballet Russe, writing for sophisticated audiences who were enjoying the exoticism of the vague Russian flavors he would bring. For example, in the Firebird Ballet, or Petrushka, a ballet based on Russian folk gestures. But Firebird and Petrushka are largely tonal, you can unravel them as narrative. The music makes sense. Consonance, dissonance, resolution, consonance again. So instead, now, Stravinsky takes on his landmark work, The Rite of Spring. It was imagined and choreographed by his friend Diaghilev of the Ballet Russe. Diaghilev Ballet Russe. Diaghilev is an important figure in ballet at this time. He also had in the Ballet Russe was well, I'll get into that later. Skip that. I'm not editing this. I'm just doing it. So Rite of Spring. Le Sacre du Printemps. The ballet is set in prehistoric times, pre-Christian times, in a way, just as Wagner tried to do with The Ring, except Stravinsky's going back not to justify current human morality and human existence and to say, here's how humans came to be. He's just taking us back in time so that, in a way, we are confronted with human as wild animal or human as pre-civilized person, and perhaps we're shocked by that. My notes are all frayed. So, this work did explode some ideas. The meters, the time signatures in Rite of Spring are asymmetrical, changing, shifting. It's not 4/4 time anymore. If you remember back to the chapter with Rite of Spring in your Ottman Music for Sight Singing, you remember having to struggle through, oh gosh, the meter changed again. And it's not 4/4, it's not 3/4, it's 7/8, it's 2/8, it's 11/16. These lopsided time signatures are going to partly become familiar to us in music of Eastern Europe, folk music of Eastern Europe. But Stravinsky here is using them in Rite of Spring to give us a sense of the primal rhythms, the gut rhythms that come out of this prehistoric people's religious experience. The musicians complained about these time signatures, and how could the dancers do any better? They complained as well. This was just too hard to perform. How can you expect to know where a phrase ends? How do you know where to point your toe or jump or anything? Well, the choreography didn't actually rely on any of the classical ballet gestures either. The musicians and the dancers are thrown into a whole new technique, a whole different way of presenting their art, and they complain about it plenty. Nijinsky and Diaghilev, the principal dancer Nijinsky and Diaghilev, work together to choreograph gestures that are not related to the elegant Baroque gesture that goes all the way back to the minuets and the court of Louis XIV. That's gone. Instead, I'll put a link to a modern recreation of this ballet, and you can see how primal and primitive the motions seem. To us, if you've seen modern dance, it doesn't look maybe that shocking. But to an audience that had never seen any barefoot dancers, had never seen a music video, had never seen any sort of modern dance gesture, these dance gestures were outlandish, as was the music. The opening bassoon melody is important. The bassoon plays unexpectedly high in its register, requiring actually a specially designed reed. The bassoonist has to make their own reed just for this, and an extension. You sort of put a tube in the end of your bassoon to actually make the harmonics work out right. The bassoon melody is a Russian folk tune, one of many used in Rite of Spring. But it's not used to make you sing along and think of good old Mother Russia. It's used in a way, in this haunting timbre, too high in the bassoon range. It's used to say this is where we came from. The recognizable folk tune is later in time. We are before time. Later in his life, interestingly, Stravinsky denied that these were in fact folk tunes. He said, I just made up these tunes, they just came to me. But people have researched and it seems like they actually are tunes, so he might not have realized he was doing it at the time. The bassoon melody, I'm not an English horn, I'm not an English horn, not an English horn, is a foretaste of the rest of the work's melodic content. It's modal. There are small bits of motives repeated in irregular groupings. Meters, as I said before, like 2/8 or 11/16, and meters that constantly change, they were not only unsettling to Parisian ears, but they were also rather, as I said before, common in Eastern European folk music. You can see how great the 19th century, how greatly was it dominated by Austro-Germanic folk music. The fact that we think that 4-bar phrases are nice and regular and melodies have an arch shape and they're symmetrical, that in art music goes back to, really, partly, to folk music in the 17th century from Austria, Germany, France, not from Eastern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, other small sort of nation areas within there. The reaction to Rite of Spring, infamously, is a riot. A riot in the theater where people supposedly tore out seats and left screaming and yelling. Your textbook, the Cheruscan, declines to give credence to actual fighting. But there was a lot of noise, at least, during the premiere. People yelling and hissing and booing. The rumor of riot is unsubstantiated, although some think that the actual protest and violence was sparked either by the primitive choreography, the jumping, which causes your body parts to kind of jump up and down. I'm not demonstrating that. Nobody needs to see those gestures from me. Or they think it might have been sparked by a lewd gesture, a vulgar gesture that Nijinsky, the principal dancer, gave. No way of knowing exactly what that gesture was. It would have been an overtly, it sounds like, from what I've read, it sounds like it was an overtly sexual gesture, something that you would not ever expect to see in public. Remember, this is the early 20th century. This is this is the days before the Kardashians and exploding the internet. So people actually were shocked by things on stage. I don't know if we're shocked anymore. Are we? Perhaps you're shocked by this video. Your book also rather sneers at attempts to recreate the original choreography, which I think is weird, because part of what we do as classically trained musicians is to recreate things. So why shouldn't the dancers do that as well? And so that's why I'm actually going to give you a link to watch at least one recreation. Two important elements as I finish up here. Two important elements that I remember my teacher in grad school demonstrating. One is that element of ostinato. Ostinato used by impressionists, right? You just get the ostinato going, you chill to it, and then something else floats along. Not here. Ostinato is this relentless driving. It keeps coming back in. It's like the force of nature. It never goes away. As long as you're alive, it's kind of scary. Like this video, actually. It's a hypnotic state. It's relentless. This rite of spring culminates in the sacrifice of a maiden to appease the earth powers, so that the tribe that is portrayed here, not a nation, not a people, but a tribe, a primitive gathering of prehistoric peoples, so that they will be in harmony with the forces of nature that they can't understand. This is relentless. She's throughout the ballet is hypnotized into dancing herself to death. Whoa. This is not Swan Lake. The other aspect that my teacher emphasized was that really sort of violent jumping, flat-footed on the ground and up and down motions. It adds to the sort of primitive violence and the idea that you're just sort of carried along by this event no matter what. So be sure to listen to the excerpts of Rite of Spring and jot down style characteristics. Changing asymmetrical meters, modal, motivic units, cells repeated, let me say that again, modal, motivic cells repeated over and over as melody, reference to folk material out of context. Best I can do there. Putting use of bassoon is not good, but saying that extended techniques and demands on the musicians, for example, in the high register of the bassoon excerpt, that would be okay. Same idea, extended techniques, demands on the musicians in these incredibly complex changing meters that they go together. One other example in your listening under the label of Primitivism is Bela Bartok's Allegro Barbaro. I think I'll talk a little bit later about Bela Bartok in another lecture. But this piano work for solo piano, Allegro Barbaro, accomplishes much the same goals as Stravinsky's Rite of Spring without necessarily telling the story of a specific Russian tribe. Bartok, a Hungarian composer, is not interested in telling that sort of story, but he is portraying in Allegro Barbaro an approach to the piano that is primitive. It is full of emotion. It's essentially banging on the piano. It's not really, but it's as close to banging on the piano with a hammer or maybe with your whole arm as you can get at this point in music history. Think about the height of sophistication that piano music is prior to Allegro Barbaro. Liszt has made it the focus of solo concert work. Beethoven has composed concertos for it. Rachmaninoff is about to compose concertos for it. I mean, the piano is, and still is, venerated as a symbol of high art. Why do you think it was on the Schwab School of Music stationery for years and years? Shape of a grand piano. Because it speaks to us as the symbol of high art music. And here is Bela Bartok telling the pianist to sit down and forget all of the artistic fingering technique that Schumann struggled to learn and all of the nuances that Chopin gave to those opera-like sung melodies. And instead he says, pound at it, beat it into submission. Allegro Barbaro is full of the same kinds of style characteristics as Rite of Spring. It's got incessantly repeating ostinatos, those driving ostinatos that are relentless. It has violent, non-artistic, non-sophisticated piano gestures that are physical motions. They're like physical motions of violence. And the melodic material is modal and repetitive kinds of cells. Forget the long operatic kinds of melodies. They're not here in this ism. I refer you to some images that I'm going to append to, I think, to this chapter and maybe to this video of the art style called Dada, which is related to primitivism. Dada was an art movement, an artistic movement, philosophic movement that said, forget thinking, just do it like a baby does. Blah, 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 blah. You just accidentally pound on things and the baby accidentally whacks itself in the head or eats the cat or whatever the baby does. That is our true self, and that everything we learn once we begin to speak and think is civilization, and why would you want to do that? Get down to your core basic need self. We want cookie, kind of Cookie Monster thing. So there are artworks that are Dada related. There's some films. Salvador Dali, the famous surrealist composer, has several Dada images and actually some films that are violent. I mean, like eye plucking out on the screen, kind of horrible violence, just for the sake of shocking you, so that eventually you are sort of hypnotized by it and you don't react. Oh, kind of like watching lots of modern television and things. Along with that, the absurdity of life, that we're all just repeating these hypnotic motions and it's absurd. So we have somebody like Marcel Duchamp who creates a sculpture of a machine that doesn't work and encloses it in glass between panes, and the glass becomes cracked, and he says, fantastic, it's broken several times. And the title of this artwork is "The Bride Laid Bare to Her Bachelors Even." It looks like a machine. It looks broken. It's encased in broken glass, and somehow we're supposed to get a narrative about a bride and bachelors, and it seems just kind of, That's exactly it. We're supposed to go, oh, I don't quite get it, and you do enough of it, and you don't get anything. You just you're assailed by images, and that's it. So I'm going to pause there, and you can check the Quizlet at the end within the Cougar View module that goes with this unit. Make sure you've listened to the music first, and you've done some reading, and you've done some studying before you take that little quiz. Okay? Talk to you soon. Bye.